Is China still India's biggest foreign policy challenge? I'm pivoting slightly away from Trump and the United States to our big neighbor and a country which many believe is the one that we will have to look at very closely, both as a competitor and a potential trading partner in the years ahead. Daniel Block, you know, there's been so much of talk in recent times about China plus one and the need for India to be seen as an alternative market to China. At the same time, China is an adversary. We've even seen in Operation Sindoor how China was seen to have fused its military with the Pakistanis. Is China still the major foreign policy challenge, even more imponderable than a Donald Trump?
I would say that China is certainly a much bigger threat to India's interests than is Donald Trump. I mean, not to downplay the challenge of dealing with a president like Trump. It's obviously significant and incredibly difficult in many ways. But, you know, the United States doesn't, for example, lay out claims to parts of India's territory, which is something that China has from time to time done. The United States doesn't have a land border with China, a land border with India. The two states' militaries have never scuffled. So I think it's in an entirely different category from the challenge with the United States, the challenge with China.
Should we be spending more time? I mean, is there a way which, I mean, the United States has sometimes seen India as a bulwark against China, that we want to build Washington wants to build a strong relationship with India in a way to checkmate China. Is that realistic anymore? Daniel?
I think that the American security community broadly still sees it that way. The question and the issue in many ways is Donald Trump himself, with his very transactional view of the world and his intense focus on tariffs and the various trade balances between countries. That's getting in the way of that kind of general trend in American foreign policy. But I think at a latent level, that still exists, that desire among the United States to have India act as a kind of bulwark against Chinese power.
And Andrew, do you agree with that, or do you believe as time has gone, Trump is happy to to do a deal with Beijing, and could that be in India's best interests or not?
No, I think Trump and his administration see China as the principal threat. There's a danger there of falling into Cold War 2.0 thinking, and I think that's got some dangers of its own. But there are some analogies and some parallels there. If there are two great powers, it's the US and China. And what they're vying over is not just market share, and it's not just territory around China's periphery, or even the South China Sea or Taiwan. Really, what's going on, and the BRICS are a manifestation of this, is an attempt to rewrite the rules of international order, the ones that the Americans put in place post-World War II that got globalized at the end of the Cold War, right? It's that unipolar moment. It used to be called the liberal international order, but now, of course, we have to call it the rules-based international order. And it's being challenged. De-dollarization, which one of my colleagues mentioned earlier, is one manifestation of that. You know, the whole Bretton Woods thing, which made the US dollar the reserve currency for the world, et cetera, et cetera. There's a great deal of anxiety in the US about that, but there's no confusion at the upper levels of the foreign policy establishment that China is the principal threat, that India, in fact, is frustrating China's efforts within BRICS to do de-dollarization and to rewrite the rules. There is a powerful, if somewhat residual, belief that India can still be drawn unambiguously onto Team USA. That will be a bulwark against China, both in the Indo-Pacific and at the level of the rules-based international order. Here's where the self-destructive piece comes in. First of all, Donald Trump is saying things which are alienating the Indian populace. American presidents have been uniformly popular in India for a long time. This one is not, according to the polling data. And then he thinks he can have Pakistan on Team America as a kind of co-equal and deal with them and apologize for their support for terrorism and promise to invest in their oil infrastructure, et cetera. I just don't see how the United States can have it both ways. And if it were up to me, if I were president, and I never will be because I wasn't born in this country, but if I were, I would opt for the Indian option over the Pakistani option any day of the week.
And yet we are seeing Casey saying this concept of CAP, China, America, Pakistan. The American president has spoken about doing a big deal with Pakistan, oil, which he says Pakistan could one day sell to India. Are you getting a sense that here is a US president who is using China in a way that is again inexplicable. How are we to read this? How are we to read this Pakistan-US tango and China within it?
I don't think President Trump is looking at the bigger picture. I think he's got different pieces. At a given moment, he's dealing with those pieces and he's trying to get an advantage there. And that was the suspicion always that we didn't know why General Munir was invited for a lunch, why he reached out to Pakistan, even after Pahalgam, which has emerged now. Because he has said in his latest statement that they've got oil and I'm going to be naming a company which will go and extract it. No, it's not much oil. According to some reports, it must be maybe under 1 billion barrels, which is not all that much of oil. But it shows you that there is a combination of greed, of transactional nature, of getting economic benefits, and countries are exploiting that. I think what India needs to do is to exploit his weakness for investment, for money, for making money, whether it's family or America, all these larger picture is just not in the picture.
You
I
know,
think you stop looking at that, he thinks India will ban China. He'll go and talk to China. He'd rather get a deal from China than use India to balance them. I don't think he's looking that far or in that massive
so
geopolitical sense.
Jayan Krishna, should India be worried that here is a US president who seems to be cozying up to the Pakistani establishment on one side and is happy to deal with Beijing on the other?
See, as far as Pakistan is concerned, frankly, I don't think it's for serious consumption. Different. I've seen different U.S. presidents honeymooning with Pakistan here and there. Doling out some money. Here and there, largely to keep India on its toes. But beyond that, I don't see there's much that India needs to be worried about. But if I just switch over to something which you said earlier, about China, India ties and so on and so forth. I mean, a lot of people would say that China is not a country which can be trusted by Indians. But I for one, I am all for a much tighter economic integration with China. If you look at post-COVID, as many countries were looking at relocating their manufacturing supply chains to destinations other than China. India was a front runner, but India did not get as many investments as we should have got. One reason was our manufacturing supply chains were not integrated with China at all, right? Had that been the case, things would have been different. And I somehow feel people say that, what about geopolitical ties? I would think that, if our economic ties improve with China, the geopolitical ties would improve automatically. Because in today's day and age, economic
That's an interesting viewpoint. That's an interesting contentious viewpoint, that if our economic relations with China improve, that will improve political relations. You agree with that, yes, Sinha? Because China remains the elephant in the room. And we've opened up once again visas to Chinese. 5 years after Galwan, we are putting the relationship back on track. But can it really ever be on track? Can we, given what happened during Operation Sindoor, clearly China was backing Pakistan through and through?
Rajdeep, I'm quite clear in my mind that China is our biggest challenge. And I'm consciously not using the word threat, though I'm inclined to do that also. Because I've served in the neighborhood, I know exactly what China has been doing and what China did in Operation Sindoor, which you referred to. Now, we have to manage that relationship. We have had a relationship with China that spans thousands of years. So we cannot let a few incidents completely derail our relationship. So I think managing the relationship requires certainly economic cooperation wherever it's possible, where there is no real threat to the national security. We should certainly be dealing with China. But you must also, if you talk about the deficits and trade imbalances, I mean, the biggest trade imbalance that we have is with China. And so I think we need to address these issues, obviously talk to China as best as we can. But I'm afraid I don't see, this whole rig thing emerging. It may as a temporary sort of measure, but I don't see rig being up an issue, and certainly not China.
Okay.